Mao Zedong, also known as Chairman Mao, was a Chinese Communist revolutionary who was the founder of the People's Republic of China (PRC), which he led as the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party from the establishment of PRC in 1949 until his death in 1976. Ideologically, a Marxist-Leninist, his theorist, military strategies and political policies are collectively known as Maoism. Mao was the son of a prosperous peasant in Shaoshan, Hunan. He supported Chinese nationalism and had an anti-imperialist outlook early in his life, and was particularly influenced by the events of Xinzai Revolution of 1911 and May 4th movement of 1919. He later adopted Marxist-Leninism while working at Peking University as a librarian, and became a founding member of the Chinese Communist Party (CCP), leading the Autumn Harvest Uprising in 1927. During the Chinese Civil War between the Kuomintang and the CCP, Mao helped to found the Chinese Workers' and Peasants' Red Army, led the Jiangxi Soviet's radical land reform policies, and ultimately became the head of CCP during the Long March. Although the CCP temporarily allied with the KMT under the Second United Front during the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937 to 1945, China's civil war resumed after the Japan's surrender, and Mao's forces defeated the nationalist government, which overthrew Taiwan in 1949. In October 1st, 1949, Mao proclaimed the foundation of the PRC, a Marxist-Leninist single-party state controlled by the CCP. In the following years, he solidified his control through the Chinese land reform against the landlords, the campaign to suppress counter-revolutionaries, the 3 anti and 5 anti-campaigns, and through psychological victory in the Korean War, which altogether resulted in the deaths of several million Chinese. From 1953 to 1958, Mao played an important role in enforcing planned economy in China, constructing the first constitution of the PRC, launching the industrialization program, and initiating military projects such as the 2 bombs, 1 satellite project, and Project 523. His foreign policies during this time were dominated by the Sino-Soviet split, which drove a wedge between the China and the Soviet Union. In 1955, Mao launched the Sufan movement, and in 1957 he launched the anti-rightist campaign, in which at least 550,000 people, mostly intellectuals and dissidents, were persecuted. In 1958, he launched the Great Leap Forward that aimed to rapidly transform China's economy from agrarian to industrial, which led to the deadliest famine in history and deaths of 15 to 55 million people between 1958 and 1962. In 1963, Mao launched the Socialist Education Movement, and in 1966 initiated the Cultural Revolution, a program that removed the counter-revolutionary elements in Chinese society, which lasted 10 years and was marked by a violent class struggle, widespread destruction of cultural artifacts, and unprecedented elevation of Mao's cult of personality. Tens of millions of people were persecuted during the revolution, while the estimated number of deaths ranges from hundreds of thousands to millions. After years of ill health, Mao suffered a series of heart attacks in 1976 and died at the age of 82. During Mao's era, China's population grew from around 550 million to over 900 million, while the government did not strictly enforce its family planning policy. Widely regarded as one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, Mao remains a controversial figure within and outside China. Beyond politics, Mao is also known as a theorist, military strategist, and poet. During his leadership tenure, China was heavily involved with other Southeast Asian communist conflicts such as the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Cambodian Civil War, which brought the Khmer Rouge to power. Mao had been praised for transforming China from a semi-colony to a leading world power with great advanced literacy, women's rights, basic healthcare, primary education, and life expectancy. The government during Mao's rule was also responsible for the vast number of deaths, with estimates ranging from 40 to 80 million victims through starvation, persecution, prison labor, and mass executions. During Mao's lifetime, the English language media universally rendered his name as Mao Zedong, using his word-gile system of transliteration for standard Chinese through with the circumflex accent in the syllable "se" dropped. Due to its recognizability, the spelling was used widely even by the Foreign Ministry of the PRC after the Hanyu Pinyin became the PRC's official romanization system from Mandarin Chinese in 1958. The well-known booklet of Mao's political statements, the little red book, was officially entitled Quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong in English translations. While the Pinyin-derived spelling Mao Zedong is increasingly common, the word Giles derived from spelling Mao Zedong continues to be used in modern publications to some extent. Mao Zedong was born on 26 December 1892 in Shaoshan village, Hunan. His father, Mao Yinchang, was a formerly impoverished peasant who had become one of the wealthiest farmers in Shaoshan. Growing up in rural Hunan, Mao described his father as a stern disciplinarian who would beat him and his 3 siblings, the boys Zemin and Zetan, as well as an adopted girl, Zejian. Mao's mother, Wen Kuimei, was a devout Buddhist who tried to temper her husband's strict attitude. Mao too became a Buddhist but abandoned this faith in the mid teenage years. At age 8, Mao was sent to Shaoshan Primary School, learning the value systems of Confucianism. He later admitted that he did not enjoy the classical Chinese text preaching Confucian morals, instead favoring classic novels like The Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Water Margin. At age 13, Mao finished primary education, and his father united him with an arranged marriage to the 17-year-old Luo Hizinyu, thereby uniting their land-owning families. Mao refused to recognize her as his wife, becoming a fierce critic of arranged marriage and temporarily moving away. Luo was locally disgraced and died in 1910 at only 20 years old. Over the next few years, Mao Zedong enrolled and dropped out of a police academy, a soap production school, a law school, an economics school, and the government-run Changsha Middle School. Studying independently, he spent much time in Changsha's library, reading core works of classical liberalism such as Adam Smith's The Wealth of the Nations and Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws, as well as the works of the Western scientists and philosophers such as Darwin, Mill, Rousseau, and Spencer. Viewing himself as an intellectual, years later he admitted that at this time he thought himself better than working people. He was inspired by Friedrich Paulsen, a neo-Kantian philosopher and educator whose emphasis on the achievement of a carefully defined goal as the highest value led Mao to believe that the strong individuals were not bound by moral codes but should strive for a great goal. His father saw no use in his son's intellectual pursuits, cut off his allowance, and forced him to move into a hostel for the destitute. Mao moved to Beijing, where his mother, Yang Jiangji, had taken a job at Peking University. Yang became Mao's exceptionally intelligent and handsome, securing a job as an assistant to the university librarian Li Dazhao, who would become an early Chinese communist. Li authored a series of new youth articles on the October Revolution in Russia, during which the Communist Bolshevik Party under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin had seized power. Lenin was an advocate of socio-political theory of Marxism, first developed by the German sociologist Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and these articles added Marxism to the doctrines in the Chinese revolutionary movement. On 4th May 1990, students in Beijing gathered at the Tiananmen to protest the Chinese government's weak resistance to Japanese expansion in China. Patriots were outraged at the influence given to the Japan in the 21 demands in 1915, the complicity of Duan Qirui's Beiyang government, and the betrayal of China in the Treaty of Versailles, wherein Japan was allowed to receive territories in Shandong which had been surrendered by Germany. These demonstrations ignited the nationwide May 4th movement and fueled the New Culture movement, which blamed China's diplomatic defeats on social and cultural backgrounds. The Chinese Communist Party was founded by Chen Duxiu and Li Dazhao in the French concession of Shanghai in 1921 as a study society and informal network. Mao set up a Changsha branch, also established a branch of the Socialist Youth Corps and a cultural book society, which opened a bookstore to propagate revolutionary literature throughout Hunan. He was involved in the movement for Hunan autonomy in the hope that a Hunanese constitution would increase civil liberties and make his revolutionary activity easier. When the movement was successful in establishing provincial autonomy under a new warlord, Mao forgot his involvement. By 1921, small Marxist groups existed in Shanghai, Beijing, Changsha, Wuhan, Guangzhou, and Jinan. It was decided to hold a central meeting which began in Shanghai on 23 July 1921. The first session of the National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party was attended by 13 delegates, Mao included. After the authorities sent a police spy to the Congress, the delegates moved to a boat on South Lake near Jiangxing in Zhejiang to escape detection. Although Soviet and Comintern delegates attended, the first Congress ignored Lenin's advice to accept a temporary alliance between the communists and the bourgeois Democrats, who also advocated national revolution. Instead, they stuck to the orthodox Marxist belief that the only urban proletariat could lead a socialist revolution. After the Third Congress of the Communist Party in Shanghai in June 1923, the delegates reaffirmed their commitment to working with the KMT. Supporting this position, Mao was elected to the party committee, taking up residence in Shanghai. At first KMT Congress held in Guangzhou in early 1924, Mao was elected an alternate member of the KMT Central Executive Committee and put forward 4 resolutions to decentralize power to urban and rural bureaus. His enthusiastic support for the KMT earned him the suspicion of Li Lisan, his Hunan comrade. Fresh from the success of the northern expedition against the warlords, Chiang turned on the communists who by now numbered in the tens of thousands across China. Chiang ignored the orders of the Wuhan-based left KMT government and marched on Shanghai, a city controlled by communist militias. As the communities awaited Chiang's arrival, he loosed the White Terror, massacring 5,000 with the aid of Green Gang. In Beijing, 19 leading communists were killed by Zhang Zuolin, That May, tens of thousands of communists and those suspected of being communists were killed, and the CCP lost approximately 15,000 of its 25,000 members. The CCP Central Committee hiding in Shanghai expelled Mao from their ranks from the Yunnan Provisional Committee as punishment for his military opportunism, for his focus on rural activity, and for being too lenient with bad gentry. The more orthodox communists, especially regarding the peasants as backward and ridiculed Mao's idea of mobilizing them. They nevertheless adopted three policies he had long championed: the immediate formation of Workers' Council, the confiscation of all land without exemption, and the rejection of KMT. Mao's response was to ignore them. He established a base in Jingangshan City, an area with the Jingangan Mountains, where he united 5 villages of the self-governing state and supported the confiscation of land from the rich landlords who were re-educated and sometimes executed. He ensured that no massacres took place in the region and pursued a more lenient approach that they advocated by the Central Committee. In addition to land distribution, Mao promoted literacy and non-hierarchical organization relationships in Jingangshan, transforming the area's social and economic life, and attracted many local supporters. In January 1929, Mao and Zhu evacuated the base with 2,000 men and further 800 provided by Peng, and took their army south to the area around Tonggo and Jiangfeng in Jiangxi. The evacuation led to a drop in morale, and many troops became disobedient and began thieving. This worried Li Lisan and the Central Committee, who saw Mao's army as lumpen proletariat that were unable to share their proletariat class consciousness. In keeping with the orthodox Marxist thought, Li believed that only the urban proletariat could lead a successful revolution, and saw little need for Mao's peasant guerrillas. He ordered Mao to disband his army into units to be sent out to spread the revolutionary message. Mao replied that while he conquered with Li's theoretical position, he would not disband his army nor abandon his base. Both Li and Mao saw the Chinese Revolution as the key to world revolution, believing that a CCP victory would spark the overthrow of global imperialism and capitalism. In this, they disagreed with the official line of the Soviet government and Comintern. Officials in Moscow desired greater control over the CCP and removed Li from power by calling him to Russia for an inquest into his errors. They replaced him with Soviet-educated Chinese communists known as the 28 Bolsheviks, two of whom, Bogu and Zhang Weitian, took control of the Central Committee. Mao disagreed with the new leadership, believing they grasped little of the Chinese situation, and he soon emerged as their rival. On 14 October 1934, the Red Army broke through the KMT line on the Jiangxi Soviet southwest corner at Xinfeng with 85,000 soldiers and 15,000 party cadets, and embarked on the long march. In order to make the escape, many of the wounded and the ill, as well as women and children, were left behind, defended by a group of guerrilla fighters whom the KMT massacred. The 100,000 who escaped headed to southern Hunan, the first crossing the Xiang River after heavy fighting, and then the Wu River in Guizhou, where they took Zunyi in January 1935. Temporarily resting in the city, they held a conference here. Mao was elected to a position of leadership, becoming chairman of Politburo and the de facto leader of both party and Red Army. In part because of his candidacy was supported by Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, insisting that they operate as a guerrilla force. He led out a destination, the Shenxi Soviet in Shaanxi, northern China, from where the communists could focus on fighting the Japanese. Mao believed that in focusing at the anti-imperialist struggle, the communists would earn the trust of the Chinese people, who in turn would renounce the KMT. Mao's troops arrived in Yan Soviet during October 1935 and settled in Pao-an until spring 1936. While there, they developed links with local communities, distributed and farmed the land, offered medical treatment, and began literacy programs. Mao now commanded 15,000 soldiers, boosted by the arrival of He Long's men from Hunan and the armies of Zhu Deng and Zhang Gaotao returned from Tibet. In February 1936, they established the Northwest Anti-Japanese Red Army University in Yan, through which they trained an increasing number of new recruits. In January 1937, they began the anti-Japanese expedition that sent a group of guerrilla fighters into Japanese-controlled territory to undertake sporadic attacks. In May 1937, a communist conference was held in Yan to discuss the situation. Western reporters also arrived in the border region, as the Soviet had been renamed. Most notable were Edgar Snow, who used these experiences as a basis for Red Star over China, and Agnes Medley, whose accounts brought international attention to Moscow's. Resuming civil war, in 1944, the US sent a special diplomatic envoy called the Dixie Mission to the Chinese Communist Party. The American soldiers who were sent to the mission were favorably impressed. The party seemed less corrupt, more unified, and more vigorous in the resistance to Japan than the Kuomintang. The soldiers confirmed to the superiors that the party was both strong and popular over broad area. In the end of the mission, the contacts which the US developed with the Chinese Communist Party led to very little. At the end of World War II, the US continued their diplomatic and military assistance to Chiang Kai-shek and his KMT government forces against the People Liberation Army PLA led by Mao Zedong during the Civil War, and abandoned the idea of a coalition government which would include the CCP. Likewise, the Soviet Union gave support to Mao by occupying northeastern China and secretly giving it to the Chinese Communists in March 1946. Mao proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China from the Gate of Heavenly Peace on October 1st, 1949, and later that week declared the Chinese people have stood up. Mao went to Moscow for long talks in the winter of 1949-50. Mao initiated the talks which focused on the political, economic, and revolution in China, foreign policy, railways, naval bases, and Soviet economic and technical aid. The resulting treaty reflected Stalin's dominance and his willingness to help Mao. In January 1958, Mao launched the second five-year plan known as the Great Leap Forward, a plan intended to turn China from an agrarian nation to an industrialized one, as an alternative model for economic growth to the Soviet model, focusing on heavy industry that was advocated by others in the party. Under this economic program, the relatively small agricultural collectives that had been formed to date were rapidly merged into far larger people's communes, and many of the peasants were ordered to work on massive infrastructure projects and on the production of iron and steel. Some private food production was banned, and livestock and farm implements were brought under the collective ownership. At the Lushan Conference in July and August 1959, several ministers expressed concern that the Great Leap Forward had not proved as successfully as planned. The most direct of this was Minister of Defense and Korean War veteran General Peng Dehuai. Following Peng's criticism of the Great Leap Forward, Mao orchestrated a purge of Peng and his supporters, stifling criticism of the Great Leap policies. Senior officials who reported the truth of the famine to Mao were branded as right opportunists. A campaign against right-wing opportunism was launched and resulted in the party members and ordinary peasants being sent to prison labor camps where many will subsequently die in the famine. Years later, the CCP will conclude that as many as 6 million people were wrongly punished in the campaign. On the international front, the period was dominated by further isolation of China. The Sino-Soviet split resulted in the Khrushchev's withdrawal of all Soviet techno experts and aid from the country. The split concerned with the leadership of world communism. The USSR had a network of communist parties it supported. China now created its own rival network to battle it out for local control of the left in the numerous countries. Lawrence M. Luty writes, the Sino-Soviet split was one of the key events of the Cold War, equal in importance to the construction of Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Second Vietnam War, and Sino-American rapprochement. The split helped to determine the framework of the Second World War in general and influenced the course of the Second Vietnam War in particular. During the early 1960s, Mao became concerned with the nature of the post-1959 China. He saw the revolution and the Great Leap Forward had replaced the old ruling elite with a new one. He was concerned that those in power were becoming estranged from the people they were to serve. Mao believed that a revolution of culture would unseat and unsettle the ruling class and keep China in a state of continuous revolution that theoretically would serve the interest of the majority, rather than a tiny and a privileged elite. State Chairman Liu Xiaoqi and General Secretary Deng Xiaoping favored the idea that Mao be removed from actual power as China's head of state and government, but maintain his ceremonial and symbolic role as chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, with the party upholding all of his positive contributions to the revolution. They attempted to marginalize Mao by taking control of economic policy and asserting themselves politically as well. Many claim that Mao responded to Liu and Deng's movements by launching the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution in 1966. Some scholars such as Mobo Gao claim that the case for this overstated. Others such as Frank Dictator hold that Mao launched the Cultural Revolution to wreak revenge on those who were there to challenge him over the Great Leap Forward. During his leadership, Mao traveled outside China on only 2 occasions, both state visits to the Soviet Union. His first visit abroad was to celebrate the 70th birthday of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, which was also attended by East German Deputy Chairman of the Council of Ministers Walter Albrecht and Mongolian Communist General Secretary Hamjang Tsebendal. The second visit to Moscow was a 2-week state visit, of which highlights include Mao's attendance of the 40th anniversary Ruby Jubilee celebrations of the October Revolution. He attended the annual military parade of the Moscow garrison on the Red Square, as well as the banquet in the Moscow Kremlin and the international meeting of communists communist and workers' parties, where he met with other communist leaders such as North Korea's Kim Il-sung and Albania's Enver Hoxha, where Mao stepped down as the head of state on 27 April 1959. Further diplomatic state visits and travels abroad were undertaken by President Liu Shaoqi, Premier Zhou Enlai, and Deputy Premier Deng Xiaoping, rather than Mao personally. Mao's health declined in his last years, probably aggravated by chain smoking. It became a state secret that he suffered from multiple lung and heart ailments during his later years. There are unconfirmed reports that he possibly had Parkinson's disease, in addition to myotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. His final public appearance and the last known photograph of him alive had been on 27 May 1976, when he met the visiting Pakistani Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He suffered 2 major heart attacks, one in March and another on July, then a third on 5th September, rendering him an invalid. He died nearly 4 days later at 12:10 on 9th September 1976 at the age of 82. The Communist Party delayed the announcement of his death until 4 p.m. when a national radio broadcast announced the news and appealed for party unity.